Welcome to Unit 8, Lesson 2, Data Distribution. Your objective is to describe the shapes of distribution. Your essential question is, how can you describe the shape of a distribution of data sets? Recall that in Lesson 1 we talked about data, and data is that collection of facts. Once we collect those facts, we can display it in a variety of graphs. You've discussed graphs in elementary school, such as bar graphs, line graphs, circle graphs, and you've even talked about dot plots. We can use dot plots along with histograms and box and whisker plots to describe the distribution of that data. Dot plots are very useful in showing the center and the variance. The center has to do with the rise or the height. You can see like right here is the height of my data, or the variance, which is my spread. The shape of the data can take on a variety of different shapes. We're going to focus on 3 shapes for 6th grade, but I am going to show you a couple other shapes as well. When we have a normal distribution, our shapes are considered to have like a bell curve. And so you can see here that when I draw kind of like this line over my data points, it makes kind of that shape of a bell. If I were to split it down the center where it's at the height, you can see that the left side of the graph is like a mirror image of that right side. They're equal, like 50-50 on both sides, or just about 50-50 on both sides. So that is considered symmetrical. When we have our data and our bell curve kind of looks like this, it's not symmetrical. This is considered skewed right. The tall of the graph extends to the right. So most of the data points are on my left side. And then we have skewed left, which my bell curve then looks like this, and you can see that the tall of my graph extends to the left. Most of my data is on the right side, so it's considered skewed left. Just so that you're aware of other types, we have what's called a U shape. And if you notice here, I'm going to use a different color. My bell curve is almost like it's upside down. So the center is the smallest part. And then we have also data that's kind of scattered all over or doesn't make like a bell curve. Okay. The spread or the variability in the data points describes how far apart that data is from one another. So this also can be referred to as a range. Looking at my graph on the right, you can see that on the bottom, I have a long range or distance between my data points, and my graph is a little bit more flatter. On my top graph, it's a little bit taller. My data is more together, and my range is not as far apart. So the spread is smaller. The center of our data, when looking at a graph, the median and the mean both represent that center data. When my data is skewed either to the left or to the right, then the median is the best way to represent that data. Because if you notice on that graph, and I'm highlighting the median, is closest to the high part or the tall part of the graph. Whereas when my data is symmetric, the mean is always going to be the high point of that graph. So the mean is a better representation of that data. A doctor's office takes the pulse of their patients and records the data in a dot plot. We're going to use a dot plot to answer the following questions. What is the lowest pulse? Looking at my dot plot, I can see that I have the lowest dots are at 64. So it's 64 beats per minute. What is the highest? That would be on the other end, and that would be 80. So 80 beats per minute. What is the most common heart rate? So I'm looking at which one has the most, which would be 70. So 70 beats per minute. How many people have a pulse of over 76? So I'm not including 76, I'm looking for over 76. And I only have one dot, so therefore that represents one person. How would I describe the general spread of my data? Well, if I were to draw a line over there, it's somewhat symmetrical. And I have a spread between 64 and 80 with a common heart rate or beats per minute of 70. Now we're going to go ahead and analyze some dot plots. If you feel comfortable, go ahead and pause for dot plot A, work on it, and then come back and see how you did. If you want to do A with me and then pause for B, that's fine. But please do pause for one of them and try one on your own to make sure that you're understanding and grasping this concept of understanding that data distribution. Let's go ahead and look at 1. Where is most of this data located? Well, when I'm looking at my data, I can see that most of my data is right here because those are the highest points. So I'm going to say between 1 and 2. How is the data spread out? Well, it goes from 0 to 6, which is not too far, and a majority of it is kind of all clustered close together. Is the data grouped around the left, the middle, or the right? So when I draw my bell curve, give me that extra little visual support, I can see that the majority of it is on the left side, so my data is considered skewed right. So notice that I put it's on the left, but it's called skewed right. I'm not saying that the data is on the right. Could this data, or what could this data represent? There's a variety of things this data could represent, so there's a variety of different possible answer choices. One could be the number of books somebody read. Now let's go ahead and look at plot B. Where is most of my data located? So when I'm looking at it, my highest point would be at 20, where I have 3 dots. And how is my data spread? Well, it goes from 10 to 24, but you can kind of see it's kind of spread out evenly. And then, is the data grouped towards the right, the left, or the middle? When I draw that bell curve, it's almost symmetrical. And then my highest point is 20. And then, what would the data represent? It could represent, again, a variety of different things. maybe the number of movies somebody saw last year. Now we're going to analyze a histogram. And I know that we haven't discussed histograms yet. However, we still can look at it and be able to answer questions about that data distribution. I can click on the right pen here. I can go ahead and see that visual of if it's skewed or symmetrical. And I can also see where that center is, that high point of my data. So looking at question 3, it says the histogram showing the number of points scored in a game has what type of distribution? Well, looking at that, the majority of my data is to the left, so it's skewed right. And where is most of my data found? Well, it's found between 10 and 19. The next question is a typo. As we're not answering the same question twice. So the histogram showing the height of pediatric patients has what type of distribution and where is most of that data found? Well, here it looks like most of my data is on the right, so it is skewed left. And my high point is at that range between 40 and 50. I hope you enjoyed learning about data distribution and the different types. When talking about data, remember, you can describe it by the shape, the center, and the spread. Make sure you finish your Khan Academy, iExcel, and exit ticket before going to the next lesson. And if you have any questions about this PowerPoint or any of the activities that you're doing, please write your question in the discussion section in lesson 2.